Have you ever wondered why God seems to make it so hard to empirically and definitively prove his existence? And so God had to orchestrate the situation in such a way that it allows for us to entirely retain our autonomy and engage the relationship kind of at our own pace, for lack of a better word, and to get to know him separately from the full display of his magnitude and glory, and simultaneously be in a position where we feel like we were free to choose it. Like we didn't choose it because we were manipulated into it, because he kind of like created a scenario or played us into it, but rather we chose it because he is who he says he is. Like I said, this is a massive, massive concept, and I have a much more cohesive way of putting all this together, but it's just going to be a much longer teaching. At some point I'm probably going to have to do it on YouTube, but I had a minute, I hadn't posted, and I wanted to put this up for you guys because I just thought it was an interesting question. I thought maybe some other people might have this question, and I hope this helps you maybe think a little bit more broadly about why it is that having a relationship with God can be hard sometimes. All right, enough rambling. If y'all have more questions, drop them, and I'll make a video on it. Till next time, see ya. I mean, you would think if God wanted us to know him as much as Scripture seems to indicate, that he would make it easy for us to find him, to know him, to see him, to engage with him. Which is essentially the argument that I heard made between an atheist and a theist, and I thought this was an interesting topic, so I decided I'd try and tackle kind of like a high-level thought on this. Just in case any of you maybe had the same question. Now, I want to preface this with, I have not gone through the rigors of taking Scripture apart to be able to answer this question. So I'm going to give you the answer that I hold to be true in my current state, but with the preface that this is something that I'm still exploring and still researching. So to start this thought, my son once asked me, why does God not just show up? Like, why doesn't he just show up right here, right now in front of me? Because then if he did, I would know that he was real, and that would be it. There wouldn't be any question, and I wouldn't be in a position where, I'm having to kind of wonder or decide or have doubts. And it was such an interesting question. My son I think he was 10 at the time. And it was a very interesting, like, hearing the question, it's like such an innocent, but yet seemingly obvious question. And I felt like the Spirit told me in that moment, because my response, it just didn't even feel like it came from me, to be completely honest. I just asked him, I said, well, if he showed up right here, right now, would you have any choice but to believe in him? And of course he said no. And that made me think, if you think about the idea of God, we're talking about the creator of the universe, the one who made everything. Like the vastness of a being like that is beyond comprehension. Which even, honestly, to say being is not even accurate. I mean, I actually made this observation in one of my other videos that God is not a being that we discover in reality. God is reality, because all things that have being derive their being from him. Without God, nothing is real. So he is the essence of reality, and all things that are real derive their reality from him. So with that as kind of as the basis for how to think about the vastness, the power, the awe, just the magnitude of who and what God is, right? When you think about it in those terms, and then you ask the question, would I have a choice but to believe and follow him if he revealed himself in the full, if we were even able to observe him, which obviously, I mean, we couldn't, not in these corporeal forms anyway. It would be like, I mean, how do you observe reality from a position within reality? You know what I mean? But assuming that was even possible, assuming that it was possible for us to observe him in his fullness, every person that I've read about in Scripture who has encountered God in, even in the form that he takes in heavens. So that's not even his full form. Like, that's just, like, that's the form that he has placed in heaven that is observable by a person. Okay, so just like thinking about like how far down he had to shrink himself just to produce something that we can interact with. Every person who has encountered God in that form has fallen on their face in abject fear. Even people who were, like, we're talking like Elijah, like the prophet. I mean, this is one of the most powerful prophets. This is the guy who knows the Lord, who has communicated with the Lord on a regular basis, has utilized power. The power of God has flowed through him, called fire down from heaven. I mean, this is a guy who has seen some things. He has seen some massive acts of power from God. I mean, you got to think a pillar of fire came down from heaven and burned up this massive altar, and he wasn't shaken whatsoever. So it wasn't what he was looking at that produced this sudden like fear and sense of inadequacy, right? It was the magnitude of what God is that produced that feeling in him, that caused him to fall on his face and say, I am undone. And the word undone that's used there, that word, it means to be taken apart, like at an atomic level. Like, that's what he was communicating. I am coming undone was what he was trying to communicate when he said that he stood in the presence of the Most High, of the Ancient of Days. Now, why does this matter? Well, it matters because the relationship that God desires to have with us is a relationship that's based on choice. And that's a hard thing to accomplish. Like, we don't stop to consider the complexity of what God had to orchestrate to create beings that had the option to choose him. And not the option to choose him in the sense of choosing whether he exists or not, but choosing to choose him based on their at a relational level. That's the best way I can put it. And I think the example I would give here would be, you have all the stories about the super rich guy, and it's like there's so many movies like this and stories told about this, where you've got this guy, he's like a wealthy king, and he wants to take a bride, but he wants a bride who loves him for himself, not for his wealth, not for his power, not for his fame. And so his quandary is, how does he create a scenario where the person can get to know him without being aware of all of those other things and all of those other factors polluting the relationship to where he doesn't know whether it's genuine, right? Now, this is where you might argue, well, yeah, but he's God, so he would know it's genuine or not. He can tell by looking at the heart. So why does he have to create all this nonsense, this whole situation? Oh, one day I'm going to get to do a full teaching on this, because this is such a massive concept, and there's so much I would have to cover to fully answer that question. But I can answer it I can give you a simple answer, and there's a much more complex answer to this. The simple answer is this: it wasn't for him to know that it was genuine. It was for us to know it was genuine. And here's the reason why. Even the most self-aware person who meets a wealthy, powerful, all of the things that you would look for in a mate, like the most attractive, everything, right? Imagine all the things that you could possibly ever imagine and desire in a mate. If that person shows up, okay, no matter how self-aware you are, there will always be the question in your own mind of whether you chose this person for them, or whether you chose them for what they had to offer you. It may not be something that you have to deal with immediately. It may not be something that's immediately present. But at some point in the relationship, when you're dealing with a being that is as powerful as God is, at some point you have to ask the question, was I manipulated in some way into this relationship? Because again, it's not even actually just about wealth and power. The level of intellectual disparity between God and us is so big that if we didn't choose to engage the relationship after he sparked the interest, right? If we didn't choose to engage the relationship, there would be no way for us to know whether we were manipulated into choosing the relationship. I mean, like, just think about if you were if you were married to a narcissist, right? And you found out that the person was like a super high level narcissist operator. In fact, actually, better example, you see this in the movies where somebody finds out that the person that they're with is like some kind of CIA agent or some type of secret agent, and the question comes like, well, was I a mark? Like, was I part of your mission? How much of this thing was actually real?